Welcome to my channel. So today's topic of discussion is emergency preparedness and why it does not work standardly, and what we can do to moderate an emergency. Because basically what it comes down to is uh, most preparedness kits don't work. And I'm going to give you an example of why. You have a preparedness kit for an emergency, and it's at your house, and you're at work 60 miles away, and there's an emergency, and you can't get to your house. The kit's useless. So it all depends on resiliency inside the system that we're working with, and what we do to be resilient during an emergency or an effect that causes an emergency. For instance, everybody thinks of like hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes as an emergency, but they're not the emergency. They're a really fast occurrence that happens, and then the after effects are what cause the emergency. Yes, an earthquake is an emergency in and of itself, but the after effects are far more long-standing than the actual event. So the event, earthquake, hurricane, tsunami, you name the disaster, and the after effects are going to be far greater than the initial catastrophe. So this is where permaculture steps in. And what we're doing is we're working to create systems of resilience to mitigate and moderate emergencies while producing enough food for the local community, and water, clean water, and clean sewage going away from people. In America, we have a really heavily dependent electrical grid. We depend on electricity for the vast majority of our functions. And when the electricity goes out, people get a little bit squirrely because they don't know what to do. We do have natural gas as a backup for cooking and for fuel. And natural gas is a really excellent way to have energy ready to go when the electrical grid goes down. Because then you can cook food, boil water, you can light fires, you can do stuff. It's reasonable. So, but for this conversation, the vast majority of Americans are not prepared for an emergency. They don't deal with them every day. They don't deal in a lifestyle that is survival based, and how to work on survival. And this is kind of what I wanted to talk about, and why preparedness kits don't really work. If you've got a preparedness kit and it's got a gallon or two of water, that's great. That'll last you about a day. If it's got 4 or 5 meals in it, that'll last you like a week. It's got a first aid kit. Got to have a first aid kit. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But it's not going to last. That's the point. The point is the resilience is not there. It doesn't, you use it's gone. So to help moderate the ebb and the flow of an emergency, what we want to do is we want to have food sources around us growing. We want to be able to clean sewage or wastewater, so that way it doesn't become a toxin in our society. Sewage is not well thought of during an emergency by most people, but accumulation of toxins causes outbreaks of things like cholera and typhus, or typhoid or whatever. And we really don't want syphilis and cholera and things running loose around in our community. So we need our waste cycles to be able to go away. So in third world nations where permaculture is established pretty well, they're working on systems to send gray water and black water through gravel reed beds. They have to separate out the solids just like any septic system would. The solids have to be separated out, but the solids can go to a biodigester so they can have a dual function. And where the solids get separated out, the liquids go through a reed gravel bed, or 2 or 3 of these reed gravel beds, before they go back into the ground or go into another cleaning system for the wastewater. And the gravel has microbes that are attached to it that start consuming the nutrients out of the solution of the water, and then it goes through a reed gravel bed, from a gravel bed to reed gravel bed, and the reeds start taking out the suspended nutrients in the water by absorbing it through root hairs, and then it goes through another reed gravel bed, and they really are cleaning out the system. And we can cycle that water through mycelium, we can cycle it through worm beds, we can cycle it through a pumping system if we want. We can really clean that water up really well before it gets released back into the environment. And a lot of that's gravity fed. So that's something that America should research and have backups to for our local communities and our bigger cities. Our bigger cities actually should learn from other cities. I think Melbourne in Australia did something like that, where they used large acreage to make settling ponds, and that system seemed to work really well, and they've got a very large population. Solid waste, our waste disposal system, if the roads break down and we don't have transport because there's no fuel, our waste streams from our house, our trash and our recycling will build up. And so to combat that, all organic matter on site can be composted. A lot of people don't understand composting, but we use a system called the Berkeley method, and it's a hot compost. It's a 18-day compost, and it's well explained by Jeff Lawton from Australia. You can look up videos on composting with Jeff Lawton and on YouTube, and that will give you a really good reference on how to build and or construct an 18-day compost. And that really does break down the organic matter and the waste. And when you're done breaking down organic matter and waste, then you're left with inorganics: glass, metals, plastics. And those glass, metals, and plastics, they're not as toxic. Glass is an inert material. Metals, they can be reactive, and they can rust and oxidize, and they may have to be disposed of in a different way, but they can be recycled. And then plastics are photoreactive. They break down in the sun. So we want the plastics to be contained until we can dispose of them. Although plastics are prevalent everywhere, if plastic doesn't have food waste on it, then it's fairly inert. And if it does, as a lot of plastics do have food waste on them, those plastics can be sequestered and temporarily buried if they want to. And then they can be extracted later and thrown away when our transport system re-engages itself or recycled or whatever. And it depends on the plastic, whether it's a plastic bag or a plastic bottle, or if it's like Glad wrap, like plastic, like film plastic. And there's different things that can be done with bottles and containers. So they could turn into a benefit in the household. It just depends on how creative you are. For instance, if you have, gallon jugs and we're in a food emergency crisis, we can use the gallon jugs to retain water and filter water through sand in the jug. And so we can capture things like rainwater and put it through a cycle where we can filter out the organic materials and most of the inorganics out of it, and then use it for watering crops or something, so that way we can keep eating. If you want to get into that, there's plenty of information out there on how to capture, store, and hold water in plastic jugs and things of that nature. It's labor intensive, but if it's an emergency situation and you have nothing else to do, it's fine. Then it comes down to, that's the waste systems. So we're going to go back to infrastructure in, not infrastructure out. So infrastructure in is going to be, we're going to need things like food, water, shelter, power. And the vast majority of homes do not have a backup electrical system. They don't have generators which run on fuel. They don't have photovoltaics or wind power. They don't have biodigesters or other forms of power generation. That in and of itself shows a massive lack of preparedness on the planet. And it's something that we can solve easily but expensively. So power is running things like refrigerators, microwaves, coffee pots, grinders, and just about every other electrical device that you might need for food preparation or work. Water is a major consideration because on the scale of needs, you need an earth to live on, you need air to breathe, you need water to drink, you need food to eat, you need shelter from the elements, and then you need companionship. So, and you need to get rid of toxic wastes out of your system. So on the order of things, water is priority. And to get water in is critical. And if we don't have water in, we have to figure out how to get water in. And most people don't have cisterns on their houses. They don't have backup water supplies. They don't have stored water on site. They don't use roof water or rainwater. And they don't store water from the tap they currently have into large cisterns. Because while we have mains water from the city, we should be capturing some of it for our own use and storing it. That would be expensive, but it would be effective. And we're talking about effective things to do. Cisterns, just so people have an idea on cost of cisterns as of 2024, and this is not perfectly accurate through every sales system, but about $1 a gallon of storage. So if you have a 1 gallon storage package, it would be about $1 to store that water. If you needed 2 gallons, it'd be $2, and on and on and on. You get into the larger systems, they become more economical, but they become much more bulky. Under 500 gallons, it can actually be $1.50 to $2 per gallon of storage. So those systems are a little bit on the expensive side. When you get over about 500 gallons, it really does drop down to about a dollar a gallon for storage. And if you use that's for plastic storage units. That's for those are for the water containment systems that are the large green cisterns and the white cisterns. And depending on your community, you may need a regulation for a specific cistern for drinking water. In the process of doing that, most houses don't have the storage area for a large cistern because these things can be pretty massive. They can be like 8 feet across and 8 feet tall if they're holding thousands of gallons. And a small IBC, which holds 250 gallons, is about a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot square, give or take. I mean, depending on the manufacturer and if it's sent on a pallet or not. Pallets are not exactly 4 by 4. They're rectangles, so one side's slightly smaller than the other. That's mostly for shipping concerns, not for volume concerns. And that's typical of pallets. And the IBCs have to fit on a pallet, so they have their own pallets installed underneath them usually. So once you have your water storage set, then to drink that water, in America we need filtration. So we need to be able to pressurize the system to send the water through a filter system, and the highest recommended water filtration system for water stored on property is through reverse osmosis. It takes out 99.99% of it, just about everything, so only water can really get through. Some gases and some liquids can get through water, so we do have to be slightly careful about what got into the tank and what is in the tank currently. But that's a discussion for another day because that's really complicated. We can pre-filter the water coming off our roofs through a sand filter. That would be a tank that's similar in size to the water tank, which would be fairly bulky, but it would be filled with sand and have its discharge into the water tank without the sand. So the sand wouldn't transfer from one system to the other, but the water would be filtered through the sand before it gets to the second tank. And that would be the fine filter for most debris, detritus, and materials coming off of a roof. The second tank would have to be a storage unit and have either an acidizer or an alkalizer for the water to neutralize its pH, depending on your location in your area. And then from there, the water would have to be filtered in America for consumption, because the cities and the regulatory bodies are really not well versed in roof water catchment or rain water catchment and usage. And that is just a regulatory compliance that in America we'd have to figure out and work with. In an emergency, you do whatever you got to do to survive. It's survival. Then it comes down to food. Food is the next thing. And food is really critical because depending on your climate, you can grow or raise certain stocks of food, whether it's fish, chickens, goats, cattle, whether it's plants, annuals or perennials. And that's gonna give you your diversity of food on site. And a lot of people are not set up for having a survival situation where they're growing their own food. A lot of people rely on supermarkets, grocery stores, and in the case of an emergency, if the supply chain is cut off, there's about 3 days worth of supply inside of a grocery store. And then there's nothing else. They don't have a backlog storage. They don't have a warehouse behind the building that stores more material. They get materials shipped in every day. And if the supply chain is broken, the roads or the shipping ports are inactive, or there's no fuel for the diesel trucks to move the material, then you're out of luck. And you better have a backup food supply. And people get really squirrely when they don't eat. And they get really squirrely really fast when they don't eat. Aggression gets really high. A lot of wars are started over lack of food, famine, and we're trying to stop that from happening, not increase it. And when I say trying, I'm not saying we're trying. We're doing it. I'm working on that right now with you. So in your local area, depending on where you live and how you live, whether it's a house, an apartment, or open barren land, you can set up anything from a kitchen garden in your kitchen window, doing microgreens and kales and lettuces, all the way up to a backyard garden where you could have tomatoes and potatoes and rice growing. And you could have fruit trees. And the larger your diversity of food sources, the further you can extend your survival situation in an emergency. If we're really, really, really good neighbors, we work with our neighbors and we help them establish their food systems so that way they're not in an emergency when we're in an emergency, and that's how community works. So they may have a different food than you do. They may be growing turmeric while you're growing ginger. They may be growing grapes while you're growing tomatillos, and then you can trade and share, and you can have better meals. So food is really critical, and chickens are like the gateway animal to growing animals, because you can have female chickens, not roosters, but you can have chickens, and the chickens, if they're good egg-laying chickens, will lay eggs for you, and you don't have to slaughter the animal to get the egg. And eggs are a really great protein source, and they produce every day. So you have 5 or 6 chickens per household, and you've got enough eggs to keep people going. If you have 10 chickens, you can help the neighbors with their eggs. And that's really, really a friendly animal. They could be noisy and they could be stinky, but it's a friendly animal inside of a society. I mean, more people should have their own chickens. And then it gets into ducks and rabbits and goes on and on and on. And anyone that has ever seen Joel Salatin's work on Polyface Farms would know that he's a proponent for everybody learning about how to raise and slaughter their own animals. Then it gets to transport. We need to be able to transport ourselves away from an emergency zone into a better zone if we have to. And our first transport system is our feet. And good shoes, good walking shoes, sometimes hiking shoes, depending on your area. You may need them. So a good solid set of shoes, not flip-flops, not sandals, not high heels, nothing cutesy. We're talking a solid pair of boots or a solid pair of cross athletic shoes. You can walk 20 miles a day. So 20 miles, if you walk 20 miles in one direction, you pretty much left anything that could have been an emergency zone and walked into another zone that's not an emergency. And if 20 miles isn't enough, you just walk for another 20 miles the next day. So in 2 days, you can get 40 miles away from a disaster zone. and you should be able to find help at that point, unless you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert or something, or the Amazon jungle. So you've got your good shoes, and we're going to say that roads aren't good enough for travel with a vehicle, but they're good enough to travel with a smaller vehicle, so you could use a bicycle. Now, if you think you can get pretty far with your walking shoes, you can double your distance per day with a bicycle. So in one day, instead of going 20 miles, you could go 40. And it's not that much effort. I used to bicycle everywhere. It's not as hard as you think. So you can transport materials with a bicycle too. There's carriers. There's they've got little trailers for bicycles, so you could transport a dog or an animal, a small dog or small animal. You could transport some goods, some materials, some food, some water. You could get somewhere. You could have camping gear, stuff like that. You could go up one level from bicycles to some form of motorized vehicle like a motorcycle. And if you thought you could get somewhere with a bicycle and your walking shoes, you could go 60 miles on a gallon of fuel with a motorcycle, depending on the motorcycle. Motorcycles are highly efficient for traveling light objects far distance. It's not like a truck. It's not going to carry a lot of mass. Your fuel efficiency is going to go dramatically down if you're carrying weight. So motorcycles are not good for carrying lots of mass or weight. They're not designed for it. They're designed for travel and speed. But you could get somewhere. You could take yourself and another rider and possibly a third if you have a sidecar. You might be able to actually get somewhere away from a disaster zone. Shelter. I'm assuming at this point that vehicles like cars are not able to travel. If they are, leave the emergency zone safely. And come on, you don't want to get stuck there, but you don't want to get stuck in a bunch of traffic either. So if staying home is better for reducing your personal emergencies, stay home. If getting on the road with a bunch of traffic is going to increase your potential for problems, don't get on the road. Relax, stay put, play cards, do something else. Let the traffic abate over the next couple of days of the traffic happening. Besides, when you get your vehicle to wherever it's going to go, there might not be fuel available to refuel it. You might be stuck. So, motorized vehicles, not always the best form of transport in an emergency. Then we go to animal power, but animal power requires like farms, larger zones of maintenance, urban areas or rural areas versus urban. And you're not going to have a horse in an apartment complex, and you're not going to have a horse in your standard city. It's just not going to happen. You have to have more acreage for horses. So your rural areas will possibly have horses, but they're going to use them for transport. So if you have a far out rural area and you've got horses, that's a great form of secondary transport. We do call it horsepower for a reason, because we used to figure out that one horse could drag so much mass. And that's why cars are done in horsepower, not in other mechanical units. Archaic though it may be. Once we're able to get out of our emergency situation and get to a more prosperous zone, we can work and go to work helping other people or reestablishing an income system to reset our social status. And in an emergency, money's not really the object, but in America and first world nations, money is critical to making things happen and moving materials. So that's the basics. We're going to go over it really quick. One, you have to have the earth. You have to be on the planet. Without a planet, you're not going to survive. So, let's start there. So we need to protect the planet and not destroy it. 2, we need air. We need good, clean air to breathe. If you don't have good, clean air to breathe, you have about 6 minutes of life left. So you don't want your air to be toxic. 3, you need a good, clean source of water. Without clean, potable water, you have about 3 days, and that is a horrible suffering death to dehydrate to death. So that's 3. Food. If you cannot get food, you have about 30 days of reserve energy inside your body of survival. After that, it's game over for most people. 4, you need shelter from the elements. You need to understand when to move and how to move, so that way the elements don't destroy you. The first of those is the sun. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun is massively damaging. If you're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, you do not move around during the day, you move at night. And you follow things like the moon instead of the sun. If you're in the middle of a rainforest, you've got to be protected from the wet. So you have to have enough proper clothing to not be exposed to water all the time, because you'll get infections and fungal infections and things. So you need to be sheltered from the elements. Eventually, you need to be sheltered from the hot and the cold for the seasons. And that's like you need a house or some type of ground shelter to shelter you from heat and extreme cold. And on the order of things, the next one is companionship. We can survive a long time in Maui without shelter if we have food and water and air. But if we're all alone and there's nobody else on Maui, it's a really long way to boredom and possibly death. And people are very social creatures. We need other people. So on the order of needs, the 6th one is human companionship, or some type of companionship. And oddly enough, I'm adding a seventh one in here because it's something I forgot about before, is removing the waste streams that we create, so that way we're not sitting in our own defecation or our own waste stream and causing a toxic situation to ourselves. So that's the order of needs. And to be prepared for an emergency, we need to account for the order of needs. And I don't think that society is set up and designed for that. And that's where permaculture comes in, because what we do is we come in and we help you design your property, stabilize all those events: clean air, clean water, clean food, good shelter, good companionship, so a good earth to live on, and then an effective way to get rid of waste streams without toxifying your land. That's what permaculture does. We establish permanence in culture, or permanence in agriculture, and we want to take care of the land, and we want you to learn about taking care of the land. So if you like this content, you want to know more, leave a comment in the comments below. If you're interested in these subjects and you want to study more, you can look up Jeff Lawton, you can look up Bill Mollison, you can look up Joel Salatin, you can look up Paul Stamets, you can look up Jeff Holdengrim, you can look up a lot of these people, and many, many more. Brad Lancaster, Paul Wheaton. There's many permaculturists out there that are working on solving these problems. And that doesn't even include the people mostly in Australia and Africa, India. There's John D. Liu. He's doing great videos for China. And there's farms that you can go look at, polyface farms, Zaytuna farms, stuff like that. So if you want more information, you can research it. It's okay. In the meantime, if you want to leave a comment below, if you have an idea, suggestion about a topic that you want to hear about, leave it below. If you really like this information, give me a thumbs up. If you really, really like this information, share it with a friend. And if you really, really, really like this information, make a video of your own and send it to me, because I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Have a great day. Remember, an emergency is only a society that's slightly out of order, and we can change that back into order very easily and quickly just by putting in some prior planning to prevent piss poor performance. Have a great day.